A very warm welcome to all our viewers across Africa as we welcome you to the MTA studios in London. In today's edition, we discuss a very sensitive issue, that is freedom of speech in Islam. Interpretation of freedom of speech is one of the most debated topics today. On one hand, we have those that advocate total freedom of speech, and on the other, those that say it should have its limits. So what is Islam's view on freedom of speech? And should it carry any limits? With me in the studio to do justice to the topic is Khalil Yusuf. Khalil Yusuf is a lawyer. He's also Deputy Director Communications Central Press Office of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community. Khalil, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. You would agree that freedom of speech has become a very topical issue across the world, especially when it comes to Muslim countries, in respect of happenings around the world. You are a lawyer, so what is the legal definition of freedom of speech?
Well, it's an interesting question actually, because freedom of speech, freedom of expression has had a very long history, way back to the 1600s, when originally it was coined as part of a licensing application, actually, when an individual wanted to put forward his case. But it has progressed as time has gone on with the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And Western countries across the world have advocated freedom of expression not just as a way to offend, but actually as a mechanism to get to the truth. That is the underlying principle around freedom of expression and freedom of speech, that we can get to the truth, that we can have a robust and careful, respectful debate and arrive at information which gives people the truth about a particular set of circumstances. Right.
Western countries, as you just said, have advocated freedom of expression, free speech. Interestingly, many people think that Islam is against freedom of expression, free speech. What is Islam's position on free speech, or let me say freedom of expression?
Well, it is a fundamental principle in Islam that there shall be no compulsion in matters of religion. In matters of religion, every individual is free to choose his faith, to decide how he wishes to worship. If Allah, the Holy Quran makes clear, if Allah wanted all people to believe in the same faith, well, he could easily have done that. He could have required everybody to have the same religion, but he didn't. He let people make their own choices about whether they wanted to be believers or whether they want to be non-believers. And throughout the time of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, he didn't engage in violence in order to put forward his point of view. He engaged in constructive discussion, in debate, in example, in prayer, in order to show that actually the message of Islam, the message of God that was vouchsafed to him in the Holy Quran and through Revelation, was actually the right one. And we see that example at the time of the promised Messiah, alayhi salam, as well. There was an individual I seem to remember reading called Atham. He was a Christian missionary who had leveled some profanities at the Holy Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. And the promised Messiah, alayhi salam, engaged with him in debate for 15 days. And at the end of that, there was no conclusion. And so the promised Messiah said at that time, well, I am now going to engage in prayer. This is the next battle that is for us. He didn't engage in violence. He didn't prevent people from having discussion. But he said that my Lord is my judge. And so he said that I will engage in a duel of prayer with you. And at that point, the individual, the Christian, completely repented and said, I did not want to engage in that battle. So constructive discussion, debate, this is the way that is the Islamic way when you're dealing with matters of religion. But the key point to make is that when you do have constructive discussion and when you do have debate, it should be done in a respectful environment. It should be done in a way that doesn't harm the sensibilities of individuals. Even the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, in a hadith was reported to have said that you should not bring prophets into your debates and into your discussions. You should keep your prophets and your important people out of these things.
Right. Now, Khaled, before we go into restrictions and so on and so forth, why have Muslims been tagged so intolerant that they hardly listen to dissenting views. And many people have bought, I'm surprised with what you have just said. I'm sure many people will be surprised because they have bought into the agenda that Islam is an intolerant religion because there is no space for dissenting views. What has entrenched this perception?
Look, you have to judge Islam by its teachings, not by the individuals that have come many hundreds or thousands of years afterwards. Those individuals that claim to follow Islam, are not necessarily representative of Islam itself. In order to understand Islam, you must go to the Holy Quran, you must go to the Hadith, you must go to the Sunnah. You must see the writings of the Holy Prophet, of the Promised Messiah, alayhi salam, of the Khulafa. This is how you get the facts about religion. There are many individuals that do not understand Islam, and indeed this was one of the signs of the advent of the Promised Messiah, that Islam would be in a state of turmoil and that people would not understand their faith, that there would be Holy Qurans and there would be mosques, but actually whilst the name of God would be said, nobody would understand that faith. So this was the point of having the Promised Messiah ﷺ in the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, which has been established now for 126 years, if my mathematics is correct.
Now, within the context of what you just said, then that there will be a time, prophetic statement, that the message of Islam will be thrown away. People didn't understand what it actually means. But some of us are surprised that the basic tenets, what the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be on him, stood for. He was insulted, he was maligned, rubbish was thrown at his door. He never raised a hand in protest. So why? I just want to find out what is potentially wrong.
What is potentially wrong with what?
With some of the actions of people who continue to create the impression that Islam is so intolerant.
Well, the key point is that they don't understand Islam. I mean, you don't have to go very far to evidence that. You have the 5 pillars of Islam. The first being that you believe in the kalama, the unity of God and Muhammad as being his messenger. And then you believe in all of his prophets. That in itself is an example of tolerance in Islam, because you believe in all of the messengers of all of the different faiths. And so that in itself is an example of how Islam is a religion of peace, is a religion of unity, is a religion of respect. And so in order to be a Muslim, you must believe in the 5 pillars of Islam. And so if you respect prophets and people of other faiths, the holy personages of other faiths, then of course you cannot be disrespectful. You cannot then be in an environment in which you use your speech to harm the religious sensibilities of others.
Right. Now let me ask you this personal question. You are a lawyer. In Pakistan, Ahmadi Muslims are not allowed to say Allah is one. Yeah. They are not allowed to exercise their faith. How do you feel? And I'm asking you this again because you are a lawyer. When you see things like that, massive persecution for exercising their rights, their freedom to speak.
Yeah. Look, every true people in the history of religion, in the history of Islam, were persecuted. The Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was mercilessly persecuted. He was kept in exile with children and women, and they were deprived of food, they were deprived of water, and they were abused, there were things were thrown at them. I mean, they were treated in a very, very bad way. They were persecuted, but ultimately they succeeded, and they succeeded because Allah had vouchsafed that the message of Islam would be protected. So Ahmadi Muslims, whilst they suffer persecution, do not fear about the message of Islam, do not fear about the reputation of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What they do actually is they continue to invoke durood, they continue to engage in prayer, they continue to practice their faith. And ultimately, you will see that the progress of the Jamaat after 1984, when the Ordinance 20 was passed in Pakistan, has been absolutely exponential. The Jamaat has grown from this to that. And that is a practical example, a real example of how persecution doesn't actually limit the Jamaat, but actually is a source of its progress and of its development.
Right, we will come to how Muslims, some Muslims, generally react when the personage of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be on him, is attacked. But before that, let's look at the double standards of the West. They promote freedom of speech and so on and so forth. But then looking at the Holocaust, if you talk about the Holocaust, one talks about the Holocaust, it's considered an abomination, sort of. Yeah. But when the Holy Prophet of Islam is cartooned, they quickly resort to the umbrella of free speech to say people should be allowed to denigrate the person of the Holy Prophet of Islam. This is a big irony. Why should it be so?
Well, it shouldn't be so. I mean, this is a really good example of the injustice that we see in this world. And I mean, it's not just the example of Holocaust deniers. There's legislation in Germany that prevents that. There are many legal restrictions on freedom of expression. You have television regulation. You have laws that prevent you from telling lies in courts. You have laws that censor or give ratings to films. You have defamation laws, libel laws, all sorts of pieces of legislation that restrict freedom of speech. Racism, for example. You can't be racist. So these are examples of how the law says we will put appropriate limitations on freedom of expression. Why? Because this is for the benefit of society. And so when you look at the question of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, you have to balance two things. One of them is the right of an individual to be able to challenge a point of view. You must, I must, others must be able to say, I don't accept something. I don't believe in your version of Islam. I don't believe in your Christianity or your Hinduism or your Sikhism. And I expect you to prove it. People must be able to have that environment in which they can ask questions, because that is how you arrive at the truth. But does that also mean that I should be able to poke fun at you or insult you for my own amusement? No. It doesn't, because that doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help you to arrive at the truth. It doesn't help you to bring justice. It doesn't help you to create a cohesive society. The Pope himself had said in a speech not too long ago, he had said that, if you were to insult my mother, you might expect a punch. And this was the Pope.
If you insult my mother, you expect a punch coming from the Pope.
That came from the Pope himself. And whilst I'm sure the Pope has never punched anybody in that way, it is a figure of speech. It is saying that there are limitations on freedom of speech, and so there is a balance that needs to be drawn. And the respect for religion is an absolutely important part of this. If you don't mind me saying, you mentioned Pakistan. We've seen in recent weeks, months, years, the last decade, horrible, atrocious terrorist atrocities throughout the world. And a real source of all of this is the acceptance of religious intolerance in some countries and the denial of religious rights in others. Let me explain. The media reports on terrorist atrocities on the basis of geography. If something is happening in your region, you report it. If it isn't, well, they are not so interested. And the challenge is this, that we live in a global community now. The extremism and the terrorism, the intolerance, the sectarianism that happens in places like Pakistan and elsewhere is the fuel, the food of terrorism. Because what it does is it says, my faith is better than your faith. I am better than you. I am entitled to a way of life which you are not entitled to. And that is not God's way. Because if God wanted that, he would have had everybody the same. The Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in his last speech, said that an Arab was not any better than a non-Arab, a white over a non-white. He was very clear that everybody was equal. They are to be judged on their own conduct. So the attitudes of individuals who create sectarianism and create hatred and put individuals against each other is entirely un-Islamic. And when the West allows that to happen, when any country allows that to happen, they create not only injustice, but what they do is they breed the sources of terrorism. So it is important, it is crucial that we act with justice, that nations enact laws that are fair, that are equal, that protect the rights of all mankind. And the moment that they do that, they'll be in a much stronger position to deal with the very grave problems that we have today.
Khalil, back to the Pope's statement.
Yeah.
If you insult my mother, you expect a punch. If we should even situate it metaphorically or whatever. Let's look at the reaction of some Muslim countries when the Holy Prophet is attacked. Some kill, some burn. I mean, why should that be the case?
Look, I don't condone it. What they do is wrong, but I understand.
Tell us, why?
I understand because Muslims have a very great love of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. You know, if you attack somebody that they love so much, they feel very aggrieved. But this is where your spirituality really comes into play, because you must understand that the protector of the Holy Prophet ﷺ is not you or me; it is God. He has protected the Holy Prophet ﷺ right from the beginning. He's protected him, he is protecting him now, and he will continue to protect him. So what is the reaction of a Muslim? The reaction of a Muslim is to pray. This is always the first reaction of a Muslim, is to pray and invoke durood on the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because that is the way that you seek his protection. The other way to do that is to engage in debate. If people are attacking the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, well, you respond by showing his true example, by talking to people about the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, by explaining the Holy Quran, by your own conduct, your own example. This is the way that you defend the character of the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He would never have set fire to buildings or committed murder or done any of these horrible things that individuals do. So why should we do that in his name? That is not to honor him, that is actually to dishonor him.
Because some leaders in Islamic countries usually issue decrees for the head of people who write things denigrating against the Holy Prophet of Islam.
Well, look, I would say that this is precisely why Islam needs to be revived in its true form. You know, we must understand the example of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, we must understand the Holy Quran and the promised Messiah and the Khulafa. They are the ones who will give people the real understanding with authorities, with reference, of exactly what Islam says about these topics. So I encourage individuals to look at the wealth of information that is available, you know, from various Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat sources, and to ask questions. I mean, don't accept it just as is. Read, ask questions, send us tweets, send us emails. You know, examine your faith and come to a point in which you truly understand Islam. Then you can make a decision about which direction you wish to take.
Right. But would you say also that the media hasn't done well in this regard, the way they carry stories on the Holy Prophet of Islam when his person is attacked? There seems to be an overwhelming interest, the way they push such stories. You know, though they expected to know better. You know, would you say it is because the media hasn't much knowledge about what the Prophet really constituted, who the Holy Prophet of Islam was?
It's not all media, if I may say. There are some media that do that. You know, some very right-wing media. But in Britain, for example, the media has been very responsible, by and large. They haven't published the cartoons at the time because they felt that it wasn't appropriate to do so. And so the way to deal with, of course, it'd be great to have legislation to prevent these sorts of things, but the way to deal with ignorance is not ignorance. You don't deal with an ignorant individual by being ignorant yourself. What you do is you deal with somebody's ignorance through intelligence. So if a newspaper publication has published an abhorrent article, which offends people, which offends society, which creates division, that is a very harmful and unjust thing that they have done. But the way to deal with that, in addition to prayer and the other things that we've talked about today, is to write 10 articles in other newspapers. That is how you defend Islam, by marginalizing those words with the correct information, with saying, actually, what you're doing is wrong, and this is why it is wrong. And that's what the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat is doing all over the world. We are engaging on an intellectual level. We are engaging in a jihad of the pen. Not a jihad of the sword. No, that is the jihad. Jihad, if you understand from the Holy Quran, is only in very exceptional circumstances, declared by a recognized state, declared when there is an attack on Islam itself, which we're not seeing that. There's no attack on Islam at the moment. What you have is individuals that are unfortunately misusing the name of Islam for their own political purposes.
Most of these Muslim countries, there isn't democracy. They aren't allowed to vote to, change such leaders.
Well, what I was going to say was, and if all of that doesn't work, the example of the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was that he would migrate to a place in which there was a freedom for him to practice his faith. So if people are in a very difficult position and they find that their faith is affected, then they always have that option to migrate. But what they shouldn't do is engage in disorder, is to engage in rebellion, is to engage in disobedience in a manner that harms the country, because every individual has a responsibility to their nation and every government has a responsibility to their people. This is the principle of justice in Islam. So provided that you have the freedom to practice your faith, then you should be loyal to the country and obedient to the country in which you're in.
Right, let's come to the family setup. Muslim communities. Children, we all know, are supposed to be obedient to their parents, but most of them are not allowed to exercise free speech, the choice of marriage, and so on and so forth. Is that what the Quran says?
No, not at all. The Holy Quran doesn't impose any such thing on any individual. You have a system in Islam for marriage and other things in which there is consultation, in which you have, for ladies, you have a wali, you have somebody who is there to protect them. There is no forced marriage in Islam at all. All of these are fallacies and concoctions that have been put together by those people that have a cultural dimension to what they do. These do not find any authority in Islam, and the example of that is in the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. So you can perfectly be able to practice your faith without imposing restrictions, unfair and unreasonable restrictions on individuals that are un-Islamic. Look, if you enclose somebody, you don't give them the opportunity to be able to express their view in an open and fair, honest, respectful way. What you do is you close down debate and you create the circumstances for rebellion. Because there's no opportunity for an individual to ask questions or to air their views, and that is not Islamic. Islam is actually the faith that challenged the norm for a very long period of time. The algebra and mathematics and other science and engineering developments arose out of challenge to what was the accepted norm, arose out of questions, arose out of free expression. So how could Islam have gone through that golden age if there was no opportunity to speak and challenge the norm?
So to those who think that Islam does not promote free speech within the context of what Ahmadiyya Muslim community is doing to promote freedom of expression, freedom of association through a spiritual head, what message do you have for such people?
Well, it's absolutely wrong. Islam absolutely promotes free and fair speech. Remember, freedom comes with responsibility, and we've talked about responsibility and respect. But it is still free. There is no compulsion in religion.
There's no compulsion in religion.
No compulsion.
That's what the Quran
very,
says.
very clear, explicit in the Holy Quran. There is no compulsion in religion. Nobody is forced to believe a religion that they do not want to believe. And so the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, you'll see a wide variety of books, a wide variety of articles in which there is challenge to accepted norms. And the example of the promised Messiah himself is that he engaged in widespread debate about Islam, and he received a very great deal of mail that was against him, but his response was not to act violently, and neither was it to say that you don't have the right to express your view. Look, there was a book, Hazrat Muslim Maud, the second Khalifa, and it was written by, if I remember correctly, a guy called Rajpal in India in 1929. It was called Rangila Rasool. And that was a very nasty book. A very nasty book. A very disgusting book against the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that actually went to court in 1929, and the individual, it was held by the courts at that time that he was entitled to engage in that offensive speech, and so Muslims were very, very upset about that. They were upset about that. But the response of Hazrat Muslim Maud at that time was not to say ban all speech. No, it was to say you respond in a peaceful way, and that you engage in an intellectual debate. I mean, there was he said quite a lot about that.
Right, Khalid, we are running out of time, but I want you to give a central message to mullahs, imams, who urge their followers to react violently when the image of Islam is being attacked. What message do you have for them?
Look, the message is the message of Islam, which is that Islam does not encourage violence. Islam does not encourage you to respond in this way. That was never the example of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There was an example of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam at a time when there were enemies, and enemies who I mentioned before had, kept children away from water, and they approached the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and instead of being mean to them and saying, well, this is how you treated us, I won't give you water, he would give his enemies water. He was that forgiving, So if you want to defend Islam, if you want to protect Islam, then you have to follow Islam. You can't make your own rules. You should follow the sunnah of the Holy Prophet ﷺ and understand the Holy Quran. That is the best route.
Right. So you heard it all. Violence is abhorred in Islam, and then freedom of speech is comprehensively enshrined in the Holy Quran. There is nowhere that allows you in the Quran to attack others, even when Islam is being attacked. So till we come your way, same time, from the studios of MTA International in London, may the peace and blessings of Allah be on you all. Assalamu alaikum.